The desert doesn't give up its dead, and it rarely gives up its living. So when a man more ghost than flesh staggered out of the shimmering heat towards the gates of Fort Defiance, the sentries didn't know whether to shoot him or offer him a canteen. He was a white man, judging by the sun-blasted skin, not covered by dust and dried blood. But his eyes held a story that wasn't about prospecting or bad luck with cards. A single dark hole weeping red just above his hip was the only clear part of his tale. They called him a drifter, another broken soul spat out by the Arizona Territory. They were wrong. He wasn't a drifter. He was a key, and the bullet hole was the turning of the lock. By sunrise, everyone inside those walls would know his true name, and the fort would belong to his tribe. The sun was a merciless hammer, beating down on the cracked earth of the Arizona Territory. For 3 days it had been Kalen's only companion, a constant glaring eye in a bleached blue sky. The pain in his side had long ago ceased being a sharp, localized agony and had blossomed into a systemic fire that pulsed with every beat of his heart. The bullet, a .44 caliber chunk of lead from a settler's frantic pistol, was still lodged deep in the muscle above his hip. It was a careless shot, fired in panic, but it had been brutally effective. He tasted dust and blood. His vision swam the distant, imposing silhouette of Fort Defiance, wavering like a mirage. It wasn't a mirage. It was the destination. It was the entire purpose of the last year of his life, of the identity he had so carefully constructed. To the soldiers who would soon find him, he was Caleb Thorne, a prospector who had lost his partner and his pack mule to a band of marauders. The story was simple, believable, and peppered with enough truth to withstand scrutiny. He had been prospecting. He had lost a partner, though not to bandits. His real partner, his cousin Tyan, had been taken by the blue-coated soldiers themselves weeks ago. A casualty in a skirmish that was never meant to happen. But to his people, the Chiricahua Apache, he was Kalen's son of the war chief Nokona. He was not a prospector. He was a scout, an infiltrator, the tip of a spear aimed at the heart of the United States Army's arrogance. He fell to his knees, the last of his strength, abandoning him. The coarse sand grated against his raw skin. This was the final act of the play. He had to appear broken, helpless, a victim deserving of either pity or contempt, but certainly not suspicion. He allowed his head to fall forward, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. He didn't have to wait long. The thud of hooves vibrated through the ground. 2 cavalrymen, their blue uniforms dark with sweat, reined in their horses, kicking up a cloud of ochre dust. "Well, look what the buzzards coughed up!" The older one, a sergeant with a thick mustache and weary eyes, grunted. The younger trooper, barely a man, slid from his saddle, his rifle held at a cautious ready. "He's been shot, Sarge. Looks bad." The sergeant spat a stream of tobacco juice. "They usually are. Check him for weapons." Kalen remained limp as the young soldier rolled him over. The pain was a white-hot flash behind his eyes, but he gritted his teeth and let out a low groan, playing his part. The trooper's hands were clumsy, patting him down. They found nothing. Kalen's knife was buried in the sand miles back, and his bow was with his father. He was, for all intents and purposes, harmless. "He's clean, Sarge. Got papers in his pocket." The sergeant dismounted his joints, creaking in protest. He took the folded, sweat-stained papers and squinted at them. "Caleb Thorne. Says here he's a licensed prospector out of Silver Creek. What do you figure, Apache?" "Could be Sarge," the trooper said, his eyes scanning the horizon. Or just bandits? He's white, though. Being white ain't a shield out here. The sergeant muttered, his gaze falling on the wound. It was festering the edges, angry and swollen. Damn, that's a bad one. If we leave him, he's wolf meat by nightfall. He looked back towards the fort, its flag a distant, defiant speck of color. Colonel won't like it. He ain't got much charity for strays. The Colonel. Colonel Marcus Redding. Kalen knew the name. Every Chiricahua knew it. It was a name spoken with a curse, a name synonymous with broken treaties and burned villages. Redding was the reason they were here. He was the architect of their pain. "What are your orders, Sarge?" the young trooper asked, his voice laced with a sliver of compassion that Kalen noted and filed away. The sergeant sighed a long, weary sound that spoke of too many years in this unforgiving land. "Drap him over my horse. If he dies on the way, we'll bury him. If he lives, well, then he becomes the Colonel's problem." Being the Colonel's problem was exactly what Kalen was counting on. As they lifted him, a wave of genuine agony and manufactured relief washed over him. His head lolled, and his last conscious thought before the darkness took him was of the fort's infirmary. He had to get to the infirmary. It was there within the very walls designed to heal the soldiers who hunted his people that the plan would truly begin. He awoke to the smell of carbolic acid and boiled linen. The world was a blur of muted browns and whites. A low ceiling of rough-hewn timber beams swam above him. He was lying on a cot, the scratchy wool of an army-issue blanket covering him. The throbbing in his side had been replaced by a sharp, cutting pain, but the fiery heat of infection had subsided. He tried to sit up, and a hand gently but firmly pushed him back down. "Easy now, Mr. Thorne. You've had a rough go of it." The voice was calm, educated. Kalen blinked his vision, slowly focusing on a man in his late 40s with wire-rimmed spectacles, a receding hairline, and kind, tired eyes. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms, splattered with dried blood that was not his own. "Where?" Kalen managed his voice, a dry rasp. "You're in the infirmary at Fort Defiance," the man said, wiping his spectacles with a cloth. "I'm Dr. Aris Thorne. It seems we share a surname, though I suspect no relation." He offered a small, weary smile. "I've taken the liberty of removing a 44 slug from your person. You're a very lucky man. Another inch to the left and we wouldn't be having this conversation." Kalen let his head fall back onto the thin pillow. "Thank you, Doctor." "Don't thank me yet. The next few days will tell the tale," Dr. Thorne said, his professional demeanor returning. "Fever is the enemy now. I've cleaned it as best I can, but these wounds, they have a mind of their own." Kalen's gaze drifted around the small, orderly room. There were 3 other cots, all empty. Shelves lined one wall filled with glass bottles of various sizes. It was a sanctuary of science in a world of brutality. And it was his first checkpoint. The door creaked open, and Colonel Redding strode in. He was exactly as Kalen had pictured him, tall, ramrod straight, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the sun too long. His eyes, a pale, chilling blue, missed nothing. They swept over Kalen, filled with an immediate and undisguised suspicion. "He's awake," Redding stated, his voice the gravelly bark of command. "He is Colonel," Dr. Thorne replied, his tone respectful but not subservient. "But he's extremely weak." Redding ignored the doctor and stepped closer to the cot, his shadow falling over Kalen. "I've read your papers, Thorne. Says you were prospecting up near the San Simon Valley." "Yes, sir," Kalen whispered. "That's Apache territory. Deep in it. "What were you doing there?" "Looking for silver," Kalen said, sticking to the script. "My partner, he swore there was a vein." "Your partner's name was Jacob Miller, according to the claim documents," Redding said, his eyes narrowing. "Where is he?" "Dead," Kalen said, letting a tremor of what he hoped looked like grief enter his voice. "We were ambushed. A small war party. They came out of the rocks. I just ran. They shot me as I fled." Redding stared at him, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound was the buzzing of a fly against a window pane. Kalen kept his breathing steady, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. He could feel the colonel's scrutiny like a physical weight. He was searching for any crack in the facade. "Apache, you say?" Redding pressed. "I think so. It happened so fast. And you, a lone man with a bullet in your gut, managed to walk for 3 days through the harshest part of this territory to land right on my doorstep," Redding said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's either the luck of the devil or a damn fine piece of planning." "Colonel," Dr. Thorne interjected gently, "the man is in no condition to be interrogated. Whatever the circumstances, he's my patient now. He needs rest." Redding shot the doctor a glare that could have withered crops. "Everything and everyone that comes into this fort is my concern, Doctor. Especially now." He turned his cold eyes back to Kalen. "We'll talk again when you're stronger, Mr. Thorne. I'm very interested to hear more about your luck." With that, he turned on his heel and strode out, leaving a chill in the air. Dr. Thorne sighed and ran a hand over his weary face. "Don't mind the colonel. He sees ghosts in every shadow." He adjusted Kalen's blanket. "You just focus on getting better." As the doctor turned to his work, Kalen closed his eyes but not to rest. He was cataloguing everything. The colonel's immediate suspicion, the doctor's inherent kindness, the layout of the infirmary, the cadence of the sentry's boots walking past the window. He was inside. The pain was his ticket. The doctor was his unwitting shield, and the colonel was his obstacle. The game had begun. Later that evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and soft orange, the door opened again. This time it wasn't the doctor or the colonel. A young woman entered carrying a small tray with a bowl of thin broth and a cup of water. She moved with a quiet grace that seemed out of place within the rough-hewn walls of the fort. She had dark, wavy hair tied back with a simple ribbon and serious, intelligent eyes. She set the tray down on the small table beside his cot. "Dr. Thorne said you might be able to take some nourishment." "Thank you," Kalen said, his voice still weak. "I'm Maeve," she said, her voice soft. "My father is the post sutler. I help the doctor when he needs it." Kalen looked at her, truly looked at her. She was not a part of his plan. She was an unexpected variable. In his world, women were either fierce warriors and providers within the tribe, or they were the pale, frightened faces of settlers. Maeve was neither. There was a resilience in her gaze, a self-possession that intrigued him. She dipped a cloth in the water and gently dabbed his forehead. Her touch was cool and professional, yet there was a current of compassion beneath it. He flinched slightly as she brushed a stray lock of hair from his brow. "You're a long way from Silver Creek," she said, her tone conversational, but her eyes were watchful. "I am," he admitted. "The San Simon is a dangerous place these days," she added, her gaze flicking towards his bandaged wound. "My father says only a fool or a desperate man would go there." Kalen met her eyes. "I suppose I was a bit of both." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Most men out here are." She finished her task and picked up the tray. "You should rest. The colonel has posted a guard outside your door." The information was delivered so casually, yet it was a bolt of lightning to Kalen. A guard. Redding's suspicion was more than just a passing mood. He was a prisoner. A patient, yes, but a prisoner all the same. This changed things. It made everything harder and infinitely more dangerous. As Maeve left, casting one last curious glance over her shoulder, Kalen stared at the closed door. The lock was on the outside. He was inside the fort, but he was in a cage within a cage. He had to heal. He had to learn the fort's rhythms, and he had to find a way to send a message to his father. And he had to do it all while being watched. The sun had set on the first day. He had to make sure the fort saw only one more sunrise under the colonel's flag. The days bled into one another, marked by the rising and setting of the sun outside the single grime-streaked window of the infirmary. Kalen's body, honed by a life of hardship and privation, began to knit itself back together with a speed that surprised Dr. Thorne. The fever broke on the third night, and by the end of the first week, Kalen could sit up without the world spinning into a dizzying vortex. He used the time not just to heal, but to listen. The infirmary, a place of quiet suffering, was also a nexus of information. Soldiers with minor injuries or fevers would come and go, their conversations a stream of intelligence that Kalen absorbed like the thirsty earth absorbs a rare rain. He learned the names of the officers, the general state of morale low, the quality of the food abysmal, and, most importantly, the patrol schedules. He heard them complain about Sergeant Miller's brutal drilling, Captain Brody's fondness for whiskey, and Colonel Redding's unyielding obsession with the Chiricahua. Dr. Thorne was a constant, steady presence. He was a man of science and reason, trapped in a world of violence and superstition. He spoke to Kalen not as a prisoner, but as a fellow man often lamenting the futility of the conflict. "Redding sees an Apache behind every rock and mesa," the doctor confided one afternoon while changing Kalen's dressing. "He pushes his men too hard. We've lost more troopers to exhaustion and sunstroke on his punitive expeditions than we have to actual hostiles in the last 6 months. He seems a thorough commander." Kalen offered testing the waters. Dr. Thorne snorted softly. "He's a man chasing a ghost. Years ago, before I was posted here, his family was traveling by wagon train. They were attacked. His wife, his 2 young sons, killed. It was a band of Chiricahua renegades. Nokona's name was tied to it, though. Whether it was his command or some splinter group, no one knows for sure." The doctor sighed, his shoulders slumping. "He's been fighting that battle ever since. He doesn't want to pacify the territory, Mr. Thorne. He wants to sterilize it." The information settled in Kalen's gut like a cold stone. He knew the story, but from the other side. It wasn't a renegade band. It was a response. Redding, then a major, had led a preemptive strike on a peaceful winter camp, believing they were harboring warriors. They weren't. They were old men, women, and children. Nokona's sister and her infant son were among the dead. The attack on the wagon train had been retribution, a bloody but direct answer to Redding's atrocity. The colonel had started a fire and was now cursing the heat of the flames. Maeve was a more subtle but equally important source of information. She brought his meals fresh linen and the occasional book. Her presence was a balm in the sterile environment of the infirmary. But Kalen never let himself forget that she was a potential threat. Her questions were sharper than the doctor's, her observations more acute. "You don't talk like a prospector," she remarked one day, placing a bowl of stew on his bedside table. Kalen's heart gave a slight lurch. And how do prospectors talk? They're either loud and full of grand stories about the fortunes they're about to find, or they're quiet and broken because they never found them. She said, her eyes studying his face. You're different. You're quiet but not broken. You watch everything. Your eyes, they're like the hawks. He had to deflect. A man learns to be watchful in this country. It's what keeps him alive. It's what kept you alive, you mean? She corrected gently. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. The soldier at the door. He's not just for your protection, is he? The colonel is a cautious man, Kalen said non-committally. He's a cruel man. She countered, her voice barely a whisper. Don't mistake his caution for anything other than suspicion. Be careful, Mr. Thorne. Her warning was genuine, and it troubled him. Why would she, the sutler's daughter, risk warning him? He was beginning to see that the inhabitants of the fort were not a monolith. They were a collection of individuals, each with their own fears, beliefs, and secrets. The greatest secret of the fort, however, was one Kalen was desperate to confirm. The official story was that the recent skirmish had resulted in the deaths of 3 Apache warriors. But Kalen's cousin Tyan had been there, and Tyan had described another captive, a boy, a very important boy. His chance came during a fevered night, a calculated risk. He thrashed in his cot, crying out his words, a jumble of English and deliberately a few phrases in the Chiricahua tongue. Dr. Thorne rushed to his side, sponging his brow. The boy, Kalen muttered, as if delirious. They have the boy. Easy, son. It's just the fever talking, the doctor soothed. But Kalen saw the flicker in the doctor's eyes, a flicker of recognition. He had heard something. The next day, feigning exhaustion, Kalen listened as the doctor spoke in hushed tones with Maeve just outside the infirmary door. His delirium last night, the doctor was saying. He spoke of a boy. It was unsettling. What boy? Maeve asked. I shouldn't say. It's a military matter. Highly classified, the doctor fretted. But Redding has a captive, an Apache boy. He's holding him in the old quartermaster's storehouse, not the stockade. Wants to use him as leverage to bring Nokona to the table. Leverage, that's what he calls it. Maeve's voice was sharp with contempt. He's holding a child hostage. Maeve, please keep your voice down. Kalen closed his eyes, his entire body rigid. It was true. Kenai, his chief's only son, Nokona's heir. He wasn't just a captive, he was a secret bargaining chip. This changed the entire nature of the attack. It was no longer about retribution or reclaiming territory. It was a rescue mission, the most sacred duty. The knowledge galvanized him. He had to accelerate his recovery. He began to take short walks within the infirmary, then just outside the door, always under the watchful eye of the guard. He made himself useful to Dr. Thorne, cleaning instruments, folding bandages. Each small task was a reconnaissance. Each step was a measurement of distance, a calculation of angles. He noted the guard change at the main gate, the location of the ladder to the parapet, the fact that the lock on the quartermaster's storehouse was old and rusted. One afternoon, Colonel Redding paid him another visit. Kalen was on his feet, stacking linen on a shelf. You're looking remarkably fit for a man who was knocking on death's door, Thorne, the colonel said, his arms crossed. Dr. Thorne is a fine physician, Kalen replied evenly, not turning around. Indeed, or his patient has a remarkable constitution, Redding countered. He walked around Kalen, circling him like a predator. I've been doing some checking. The claim you filed in Silver Creek, it's real enough, but the assay office has no record of a Jacob Miller partnered with you." Kaelin's blood ran cold, but he kept his expression neutral as he turned to face the colonel. "Jacob wasn't one for paperwork. He was a field man. Said the government had no business knowing what he pulled out of the earth." "Convenient?" Redding sneered. "Just as it's convenient that the Apache who ambushed you left no tracks my scouts could find. No spent cartridges. No sign of a struggle. It's as if you and your partner simply vanished. And then you reappeared, shot right where my patrol was sure to find you." "It's the God's honest truth, Colonel," Kaelin said, meeting the man's icy gaze. "Truth." Redding chuckled a harsh, grating sound. "Truth in this territory is whatever you can get away with. I'm having you moved from the infirmary tomorrow. You can enjoy the hospitality of our stockade until I'm satisfied with your story." He leaned in closer, his voice a low threat. "And I assure you, Mr. Thorne, I am very, very hard to satisfy." Redding left, and the finality of his words hung in the air. The stockade. He would be useless there. The timeline had just been moved up. The attack had to happen tonight. He was out of time. He needed to send the signal. His mind raced, seizing on a detail he'd observed. The laundry. Every evening, Maeve and some other women from the fort would hang the day's washing on lines, stretched between the sutler's store and the barracks. The lines were visible from the southern mesas, the direction from which his father would be watching. A specific pattern, a blue soldier's shirt, 2 white sheets, another blue shirt. It was a simple code agreed upon months ago. The vulture is in the nest, the prey is confirmed, strike at the false dawn. But he was confined. He couldn't get to the laundry. As if summoned by his desperation, Maeve entered with his final meal. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "I heard the colonel," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He's putting you in the stockade." Kaelin looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw past the sutler's daughter to the woman who had shown him kindness, who had warned him, who despised the colonel's cruelty. He had to take the greatest risk of his life. He had to trust her. "Maeve," he said, his voice low and urgent. "My name is not Caleb Thorne, and I am not a prospector." Her eyes widened, a mixture of fear and something else, validation. She had known something was wrong. "Who are you?" she breathed. "I am Kaelin of the Chiricahua." He said the words, feeling strange and powerful on his tongue after so long. "And Colonel Redding has my chieftain's son, a boy named Kenai, held hostage in the quartermaster's storehouse." She stared at him, her mind clearly struggling to process the revelation. An Apache warrior. The enemy she'd been taught to fear her whole life was standing before her, wounded and vulnerable. "You're one of them. I am one of a people who wish only to live on the land that is ours," he said, his voice resonating with a passion he could no longer hide. "Redding is holding an innocent child to force a war leader to surrender. Is that the side you want to be on?" She looked away towards the window, her knuckles white where she gripped the tray. "What do you want from me?" "I need to send a signal," he said quickly and quietly, explaining the laundry code. "I cannot do it. The guard will not let me leave. But you can." He was asking her to commit treason, to betray her own people, her own home. He watched her, his fate hanging on her decision. She was wrestling with a lifetime of ingrained beliefs, with fear, with her own conscience. Finally, she looked back at him, her eyes filled with a terrifying resolve. A blue shirt, 2 white sheets, another blue shirt. She repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes." He breathed a wave of relief so profound it almost made him dizzy. "God help us all," she said. Then she turned and walked out of the infirmary, leaving the tray behind. Caelan stood by the window, his heart pounding against his ribs. He watched as the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the fort in a blood-red glow. He waited, his entire being focused on the laundry lines. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then he saw her. Maeve, moving with a deliberate calm, began hanging the laundry. She pinned a dark blue shirt to the line, then a white sheet, then another, and finally a second blue shirt. The signal was sent. From a high, unseen perch on the southern mesa, a pair of sharp eyes watched through a captured army spyglass. Nokona saw the pattern. He lowered the glass, his face a mask of grim determination. The vulture was in the nest. His son was alive. Tonight they would tear the nest apart. The air in Fort Defiance grew heavy as night deepened thick with the ordinary sounds of a garrison settling in the distant nicker of a horse, the clink of a bottle from the barracks, the rhythmic tramp of the sentries walking the parapets. To Caelan, every familiar sound was now a note in a symphony of suspense. The signal was sent. The gears of war were turning silent and unseen out in the vast, dark desert that surrounded them. His mind was a whirlwind. Maeve's action had been a seismic shift. She was no longer a bystander or an unwitting pawn. She was a conspirator. Her face pale and determined, as she'd hung, the laundry was seared into his memory. He felt a pang of guilt for placing such a burden on her, but it was drowned out by the fierce, desperate hope that she had just ignited. The guard at his door, a corporal named Harris, was a burly man with a dull expression. Caelan had spent days observing him. Harris was lazy-prone to leaning against the doorframe and occasionally accepting a swig of whiskey from a passing patrol. That laziness was a vulnerability Caelan had to exploit. His first objective was to get out of the infirmary. The stockade awaited him at dawn, a death sentence for his mission. He looked around the small room that had been his sanctuary and prison. His eyes landed on a heavy glass bottle of chloroform on Dr. Thorne's shelf used for the most severe surgeries. It was a risky tool. Too little would be ineffective. Too much could be lethal. Dr. Thorne was in his small adjoining office, engrossed in his medical journals. The man's trust was a weight on Caelan's conscience. He had saved Caelan's life, shown him nothing but decency. The coming violence would shatter his ordered world. There was a part of Caelan, a part he had long tried to suppress, that wished there was another way. But there wasn't. Kenai's life, the honor of his people, depended on this night. He waited until the fort was at its quietest, the hour just before midnight. He uncorked the chloroform bottle, the sweet, sickly smell instantly filling his nostrils. He poured a liberal amount onto a linen bandage, his hand steady despite the pounding in his chest. He took a deep breath, held it, and moved to the door. "Guard!" he called out, his voice raspy. "Corporal Harris." He heard a grunt from the other side. "What do you want, Apache bait?" "Water," Caelan croaked. "Please, I feel the fever coming back." It was a plausible request. He heard the scraping of the bar being lifted. The door creaked open, and Corporal Harris's fleshy face appeared silhouetted by the lantern light in the hall. "The doc left a pitcher right there." Harris never finished his sentence. Caelan lunged, clamping the chloroformed rag over the corporal's mouth and nose. The man's eyes widened in shock. He thrashed his heavy boots, thudding against the wooden floorboards. He was strong, his muffled grunts echoing in the small room. Caelan used his own body weight, pressing the man against the doorframe, holding the rag firm. It was an eternity in seconds. The corporal's struggles weakened, his body went limp, and he slumped to the floor in a heap. Kalen stood over him, breathing heavily, the adrenaline singing in his veins. He quickly stripped the man of his pistol belt and canteen, then dragged him into the infirmary and rolled him under the cot. He listened. The scuffle had been brief, but had anyone heard? The fort remained silent. He peeked out into the hallway. It was empty. Dr. Thorne was still in his office, the soft glow of his lamp visible under the door. Kalen felt another pang of regret. He crept past the office, a ghost in his own prison. His next objective was Maeve. He needed her help, and he needed to ensure her safety. He found her where he expected to, in the back room of the sutler's store, a place filled with the smells of canvas leather and dried goods. She was sitting on a crate, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face illuminated by a single flickering candle. She looked up as he entered, her eyes wide with terror. "You came," she whispered. "The time is now," he said, his voice low. "The attack will come before the dawn. I need to get to the quartermaster's storehouse, free the boy, and open the main gate. They'll kill you," she said, her voice shaking. "They'll kill us all. They are not here to slaughter." He tried to assure her, though he knew the chaos of battle could consume even the best intentions. "Our target is the soldiers, the armory. Nokona, my father. He is a man of honor. He does not wage war on women and children." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "But Redding will not see it that way. When the fighting starts, he will show no mercy. You and the doctor, you must not be here." "Where can we go?" she asked, her voice filled with despair. "The root cellar behind the store. It's deep, the doors are thick oak. You'll be safe there." He paused, then added, "You must get Dr. Thorne. Tell him whatever you must, but get him to safety." She nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. "And you? What is your plan?" "The storehouse is my first stop. The lock is old. I can break it. But the gate—" He looked at her, his plan forming even as he spoke. "The main gate is barred from the inside by a heavy timber beam and secured by a locking mechanism in the guardhouse next to it. I can handle the beam, but I need a diversion. Something to draw the gate sentries away for a precious minute." He was asking for more. He was asking her to become an active agent of the attack. She looked around the store, her eyes landing on a stack of barrels in the corner. "Kerosene," she said, her voice hardening with a resolve that mirrored what he'd seen earlier. "For the lamps, if one of these barrels were to be rolled against the far side of the barracks and catch fire, it would cause a panic." He stared at her, astonished at her quick, ruthless thinking. She had the same fire, the same pragmatism as the women of his own tribe. "Maeve, you said your fight was with the soldiers," she said, standing up. "The barracks is where they are. A fire there would bring every available man running. It would clear your path to the gate." Her eyes met his, and he saw not a frightened girl, but a woman making a terrible, necessary choice. "Go. Free the boy. I will make your diversion." There was no time to argue, no time for thanks. He gave her a single, sharp nod of understanding, a gesture that conveyed more than words ever could. He turned and slipped back into the shadows of the fort. The quartermaster's storehouse was a squat, windowless building near the southern wall. A lone sentry stood guard, pacing back and forth in a short, predictable pattern. Kalen flattened himself against the wall of the adjacent stable, the captured pistol heavy and cold in his hand. He was a warrior of the bow and the knife. The firearm felt alien clumsy. But it was a tool, and he would use it. He waited for the sentry to reach the far end of his patrol, his back turned. Kalen moved swift and silent as a mountain cat. He covered the 20 yards in a matter of seconds. He didn't use the pistol. He used its heavy butt, bringing it down in a swift, brutal arc against the base of the sentry's skull. The man collapsed without a sound. Kalen knelt by the door. The lock was, as he remembered, a heavy iron padlock rusted by years of neglect. He had no key. He drew the corporal's pistol aimed at the shackle of the lock and wrapped a spare piece of cloth around the weapon to muffle the sound as best he could. He fired. The shot was deafening in the stillness of the night. It was a gamble. The sound would travel. But he was betting on the fire Maeve had promised. The lock shattered. He wrenched the broken-to-pieces away and pulled open the heavy door. The inside was pitch black and smelled of mildew and rat droppings. "Kenai," he whispered in his own language. "I am Kalen. I am here for you." A rustling sound came from the corner. A small figure no more than 10 years old emerged from behind a stack of crates. In the faint starlight filtering through the open doorway, Kalen could see the boy's face smudged with dirt, but defiant. It was the face of his chief. "My father sent you," Kenai asked, his voice steady. "He waits for us." Kalen confirmed a surge of pride welling up inside him. The boy had not been broken. "We must be quick." As if on cue, a flicker of orange light danced outside, growing brighter by the second. A distant shout, then another, confirmed that Maeve had fulfilled her promise. "What is that?" Kenai asked, his eyes wide. "That," Kalen said, ushering the boy out the door, "is our path home." He looked towards the barracks. The side of the building was now engulfed in angry orange flames. The fire was spreading fast, licking at the dry timber. The entire fort was erupting into chaos. Bells clanged frantically. Shouts and orders echoed through the compound. Men, half-dressed and panicked, poured from the buildings, running towards the fire. The diversion was more effective than he could have ever dreamed. The sentries at the main gate had abandoned their post, running to join the firefighting efforts. His path was clear. "Stay close to me," he ordered Kenai, and together they ran two shadows flitting through the chaos towards the main gate. The air was thick with smoke, the sounds of panic a cover for their movements. He could see the gate now, a huge dark mouth in the palisade wall. The heavy crossbeam was in place. It would take all his strength to lift it. He put Kenai behind him, grabbing the rough, splintery wood of the beam. He strained his muscles, screaming in protest, his wound pulling with a fresh, sharp pain. The beam was immense, settled into its iron brackets. He couldn't lift it alone. Suddenly a figure appeared at his side, grabbing the other end of the beam. It was Dr. Thorne. His face was smudged with soot, his spectacles askew. "Maeve told me," the doctor said, his voice ragged with exertion and disbelief. "She said, 'My God, what have you done?'" "I am taking this boy home," Kalen grunted, his feet sliding on the dusty ground. "Help me, doctor. Help me stop this before more people die." For a moment the doctor hesitated, his face a mask of conflict. He looked from Kalen to the boy, then to the fire raging behind them. He saw the panicked soldiers, the escalating chaos. Then with a grim nod, he put his shoulder to the beam. "Together then. On 3. 1, 2, 3. They heaved two men from different worlds, united in a single desperate purpose. The beam groaned, resisted, and then with a screech of tortured iron it lifted from its brackets. They shoved it aside. Now only the lock in the guardhouse remained. Kalen sprinted inside. The key was exactly where he'd seen the guards place it on a hook by the door. He grabbed it and ran back to the gate, fumbling with the heavy iron lock. His hands were slick with sweat. The lock clicked open. He put his shoulder to the massive wooden gate and pushed. It swung inward with a low groan, opening a path to the dark, waiting desert. And from that darkness, the silence was broken. Not by a war cry, but by the whisper of dozens of moccasin-clad feet moving as one. The first wave of Nokona's warriors, faces painted for battle, silent and swift, poured through the opening. They were not a wild horde, but a disciplined, deadly force. They fanned out their targets, clear the armory, the barracks, the officers' quarters. Kalen stood by the open gate, the small boy safe behind him. Dr. Thorne staring in horrified awe beside him. The first part of the plan was complete, but now the true battle for Fort Defiance had begun. The taking of Fort Defiance did not happen with a thunderous, chaotic charge. It was a methodical, terrifyingly silent infiltration. Nokona's warriors moved not like a flood, but like water seeping into cracks, exploiting every shadow, every corner, every moment of confusion Kalen had orchestrated. The fire at the barracks was a brilliant success, drawing the bulk of the soldiers into a concentrated, panicked mob. While they fought the flames, Chiricahua warriors, led by Nokona's most trusted lieutenant, moved with chilling efficiency. Sentries who had remained at their posts were dispatched with the swift, silent lethality of a knife in the dark. The primary targets were strategic. The armory was seized within minutes, cutting off the soldiers from their main supply of ammunition. The stables were opened, and the cavalry's horses were driven out into the desert, crippling any chance of a swift pursuit or escape. Kalen, his duty at the gate done, handed Kenai over to the first warrior he recognized. "Take him to Nokona. He is not to see the fighting." The warrior nodded and spirited the boy away into the controlled chaos. His own fight was not over. He knew Colonel Redding would not be battling a fire. Redding would be hunting for the source of the betrayal. He would be hunting for him. Kalen, armed with the corporal's pistol and a knife he'd taken from the unconscious sentry, moved towards the colonel's headquarters. It was a 2-story adobe building at the center of the fort, the nerve center of the entire operation. It had to be neutralized. He found Dr. Thorne still standing near the gate, paralyzed by the scene unfolding before him. "Doctor, get to the cellar!" Kalen yelled over the growing din of organized battle. "Maeve is waiting." The doctor seemed to snap out of his trance. He looked at Kalen, his face a mixture of terror and a strange, dawning understanding. This is not a massacre." "It is a reckoning," Kalen said grimly. "Now go." "Doctor." Thorne finally turned and ran towards the sutler's store, disappearing into the smoky darkness. Kalen made his way towards the headquarters. He saw his people fighting with a discipline that would have defied every stereotype the soldiers held. They bypassed the sutler's store and the other civilian quarters, focusing their deadly attention on the barracks and the remaining pockets of armed resistance. Nokona's orders were clear. This was about crippling the army's fist, not about random slaughter. The door to Redding's office was kicked open from the inside, and the colonel himself emerged, a Colt peacemaker in each hand. His face was a mask of pure fury, his pale blue eyes blazing with hatred. He was not alone. 2 of his most loyal officers flanked him. "Thorne!" Redding roared, his voice cutting through the noise. He had shed the name Caleb. He knew. "I knew you were a snake, you treacherous Apache dog." He raised his pistol, but Kalen was already moving, diving behind a stack of supply crates. A bullet splintered the wood where his head had been. The colonel's officers fanned out, trying to get a clear shot. It was a standoff in the heart of the inferno. Kalen knew he was outgunned. The pistol he held had only a few rounds left. He had to make them count. He peered through a crack in the crates. One of the officers was trying to circle around to his left. Kalen took a steadying breath the way his father had taught him. Let the world slow. See your target. Become the arrow. He rose, fired once, and dropped back into cover. A pained cry told him his shot had found its mark. One officer down. Coward, Redding bellowed. Face me, face the man whose family your butcher chief slaughtered. Your family died because you burned a camp full of women and children, Kalen shouted back, his voice raw. You lit the fire, Redding. You have no right to curse the smoke. He heard footsteps fast and heavy coming from the other side. The second officer. Kalen vaulted over the crates, rolling as he hit the ground. He came up on one knee, pistol extended just as the officer rounded the corner. They fired at the same instant. A searing pain tore through Kalen's left shoulder, spinning him around. But his own bullet flew true, catching the officer in the chest. He collapsed in a heap. Kalen staggered to his feet, his left arm, useless blood soaking his shirt. He was exposed, and Redding was there 10 yards away, leveling his remaining pistol with unnerving calm. The chaos of the fort seemed to fade away, the world narrowing to the space between the two of them. Now, Redding said, a grim smile twisting his lips. It ends. A figure darted out from the shadows of the sutler's store. It was Maeve. She was holding a lit kerosene lamp. No! She screamed. Redding, startled by her sudden appearance, glanced in her direction for a fraction of a second. It was the only opening Kalen would get. He ignored the fire in his shoulder and threw himself forward, not away, but directly at the colonel. He crashed into Redding's chest, driving him backward. The colonel's shot went wide, the muzzle flash scorching the air beside Kalen's ear. They fell to the ground in a tangle of limbs. Redding was bigger, stronger, fueled by years of rage. He brought the butt of his pistol down, catching Kalen on the temple. Stars exploded behind Kalen's eyes. Redding raised the gun to strike again, his face a contorted mask of hate. This is for my boys, he snarled. From the ground, Kalen lashed out with his knife. It wasn't a clean, practiced strike, but a desperate upward thrust. The blade slid between Redding's ribs, sinking deep. The colonel's eyes widened in stunned surprise. The anger, the hatred seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a look of profound shock. He looked down at the hilt of the knife protruding from his chest, then back at Kalen. The boy. Redding rasped, a bloody froth on his lips. Kenai. He has his father's eyes. And then Colonel Marcus Redding, the iron fist of the territory, the ghost-haunted tyrant of Fort Defiance, went limp. Kalen pushed the heavy body off him and struggled to his knees, clutching his bleeding shoulder. The world swam around him. He saw Maeve standing frozen, the dropped lamp having extinguished itself in the dust. He saw his father Nakona walking towards him, flanked by a dozen warriors. The fighting was dying down. The fort was theirs. Nakona was not the savage of Redding's nightmares. He was a tall, proud man, his face a road map of care and authority. He looked at the dead colonel, then at his wounded son. He knelt, placing a hand on Kalen's good shoulder. You have done well, my son. Nakona said, his voice quiet, but filled with immense pride. You have brought Kenai home. Kalen looked past his father, his gaze finding Maeve. She was staring at him, at the blood at the dead man at his feet. Her face was a canvas of horror relief and a deep, unbridgeable sorrow. She had helped him, saved him, but he was the agent of all this destruction. Her home was now a conquered ruin. The sun began to crest the eastern mesas, casting long golden rays across the compound. The light illuminated a scene of stunning finality. The American flag had been torn down. The barracks smoldered, a plume of black smoke rising into the pristine morning air. Chiricahua warriors stood guard on the parapets where blue-coated soldiers had stood just hours before. The living soldiers were rounded up, disarmed, and herded into the stockade, now prisoners in their own fort. Nokona stood and surveyed the scene. This was not a permanent conquest. It was a message, a devastating blow to the army's power and prestige. They would take the weapons, the food, the horses, and they would vanish back into the mountains, leaving the shell of Fort Defiance as a monument to the army's underestimation of its foe. Kalen, helped to his feet by 2 warriors, looked at the rising sun. It was the sunrise he had promised himself, the sunrise that would see the fort belong to his tribe. He had succeeded. He had rescued the son of his chief and broken the will of his enemy. But as he looked at Maeve and at Dr. Thorne, who had emerged from the cellar to tend to the wounded on both sides, he felt the heavy weight of his victory. He was Kalen of the Chiricahua, a hero to his people. But he would forever be the drifter with the bullet wound, who had brought the fire, a man caught between the world he was born into and the one he had so violently torn asunder. The sun was rising on a new day, but the shadows it cast were long and complex, and he knew they would follow him for the rest of his life. The story of the drifter who took a fort is more than a tale of revenge. It's a testament to the fact that history is often written by the victors leaving the truth buried in the dust. Kalen wasn't just a warrior. He was a son, a protector forced into a role by the brutal realities of his time. Maeve and Dr. Thorne weren't just settlers. They were people of conscience trapped within a system they knew was unjust. This was a story of sacrifice, of blurred lines between friend and foe, and of the desperate measures taken in the name of freedom and family. What is the true cost of justice, and when does a hero's victory become a tragedy for someone else? If this journey into the complex heart of the Wild West captured your spirit, please help us tell more stories like it. Hit that like button. Share it with a fellow history or Western enthusiast, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more untold tales from the frontier. Let us know in the comments, what do you think happened to Kalen and Maeve after that fateful sun?